YouTube. All right. Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to the fourth of our movement and skill acquisition webinar series. I hope everybody is safe and well wherever you are in the world. Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland is comprised of Ed Collin, Phil Carney, Alan Dunton, and myself, Ollie Logan. And we're really actually fortunate in this webinar series that a number of our speakers that we had lined up for a conference that was intended to be last week have given up their time to do these webinars, and we've had a great response from the first three, from Sarah Kelleher, Professor Keith Davids, and Dr. Rick Shuttleworth. And if you want to have a look at those after today, then you can find those on our YouTube channel, which is MSAI Ireland. We want to set these up to maintain a level of interaction, so that's why we've chosen to limit to 100 people. So if you have a question for Stu today, if you post it in the comment section, and there's a chat box down there, and Phil and Alan will monitor that. And at the end of the presentation, then we'll come to you and you can ask your question to Stu. If you're watching on YouTube live and you want to ask a question, then post one in the comment section. It's usually to the right-hand side or down below if you're on mobile. And one of us will pick that up and we'll pose that to Stu. And for those of you in the webinar, you will be muted just for the ease of logistics of this. But if when we come to you and you have a question, then we'll unmute you. So I'll hand over to Ed, who can introduce today's speaker.
Thanks, Ollie, and welcome everybody. Like Ollie said, I hope you're all well. When we began planning the 2020 conference, and once we decided on the theme that we were going with, the coach-athlete relationship, Stuart Morgan was immediately on our wish list because of his experiences as a coach, but also the contributions he's made with things like his book, The Gifted Junior, and also his accessibility. I've known Stu a few years now, and he is incredibly generous with his time and his engagement with me and people like me, other coaches who just have a lot of questions that he is, as I said, he's very generous with his time. So when we came to the conclusion of, doing the webinars, and we asked Stu again, it seemed like a great opportunity for us to share, give him an opportunity to share his story from the times where he was working with David Ledbetter in the States for all those years to where he is now as the head of the Swiss pro golf team and working with the likes of Bernd Wiesberger and Lars van Meel on the European tour. So without further ado, I'd just like to welcome you, Stu, and thank you so much for giving of your time. And we really look forward to some of the questions that hopefully we'll get from our listeners in here today. Thank you.
Thank you, chaps. Thanks for inviting me to do this. It's always great to kind of contribute and to share. So we'll kind of get straight in, and just a little bit of my background, just to kind of take on from what Ed. I did work for David Ledbetter for a number of years, and it was great, and he was a fantastic mentor. But during that time, I started working with some tour players, and I continued to work with tour players, and I felt that it was primarily on a technical basis, and I felt like I failed a little bit because it was just about that. But with all failings, if you look at it, you learn, and that kind of got me to think about some principles that I kind of carry forth with me in the stories that I'm going to kind of tell today, that really the person in front of you when you're coaching holds the key to everything. So I went from very explicit sort of information giving and technique. I kind of took that away from the actual game. So I very much kind of look at how we coach within the game and for the game, and surround myself with way smarter people than me, so on speed dial. So that's kind of very important. And these are just my stories and my things and my experiences. They're not the way, they're a way that I kind of chose to do during my time with different athletes. So let's get into it. So as we, with the kids side, then I actually went backwards. So I started coaching tour players, and during that time, there was a huge amount that came up about parents, even at tour level with walking the fairways. So that kind of, when I started looking at it, I went backwards and thought, you know, I have to learn and go deep into understanding how kids coaching and how to help them, how to interact with the parent and whatnot, to actually eventually end up going back the other way to actually coaching tour players. And that goes into understanding the player, the family, all their behaviors and belief systems that they have. At the kids level, it's actually relatively straightforward. You know, you have the player, coach, family, so there's not many voices within the system or within the team that's kind of around. Now, when we did this, this again, just one topic or one subject. This young lady, she had a dream when she was younger, and I coached her from 8, and I still have regular contact with her now, but just in different roles. And during this time, and it's probably common practice now, we did some pretty radical things around that time where we decided that she wouldn't get a handicap until she could actually reach the holes from the ladies' tees in regulation, because I felt that it wasn't in context with actual scoring and whatnot. She wanted to go, you know, at a young age, you say, I have a dream, want to play on the LPGA tour, but that kind of like narrowed in. She wanted to go to play collegiate golf in the US, and she is over there now. That was down to having a big family, you know, different social economic standpoint. She's the eldest of 6. So, you know, to actually look at getting a scholarship over there was a big thing for her. When we were growing up, or when she was growing up, we spent way more time out on the golf course than we did on the practice facility. And anything we did kind of technically wise was very much geared around specific situations on the golf course. So, okay, a little fade here, a little draw there, move the ball up and down a little bit. And then kind of questioning, okay, what would you do here? If you were in this situation, how would you kind of manage this? And the other thing was, we always made the golf course relative to how far she hit it. So she was always playing against par. So she kind of learned from a relatively early age to actually shoot under par. And if you're looking at collegiate golf or playing professional golf, that's pretty much a key indicator. I mean, if you get uncomfortable being under par, you're probably not going to get the career going where you want it to go. So we used that. We kind of moved her back now and again once she shot par or under par from a certain length. We moved her back to challenge her, but sometimes we'd also move her forward again to see how deep she could go. You know, started out when she was young, you know, just playing 9 holes, then gradually kind of increased it to 18 holes. And that's pretty much most of the time what we did when she actually came to spend some time with me. She didn't live that close, so she used to come down for like half a day, and we just kind of like hang out and, you know, and just chat. And that goes on to the parent element where with her, again, around that time, we were there were certain county setups where they were saying when they weren't sure whether the parents should be around, you know, during lessons and stuff like that. And I was very much against that. I wanted them kind of like standing next to me, kind of talking to me. So then I can kind of help them educate. And actually, I ended up giving most parents actual jobs within the kind of the team to actually keep them occupied when they're watching golf and things like that. So you know, because it's emotional. I'm a parent myself, and when you're looking at, you know, if you're looking at your son or daughter playing, you know, certain sports, then it's always going to be emotional. It was also never really a time issue. You know, we had plenty of time. It was never a rush to do anything. We just kind of, you know, took our time with kind of everything. Now, during this, over the years, my role within with her has kind of changed quite a bit. I went from a teacher, then she moved away, and we kind of just coaching, you're spending again still similar time on the golf course, but the narrative between me and her became very different. She had different problems that we would talk through. And now, with her being in the States, it's more like she'll pick up the phone now and again, you know, just to have a quick chat, run some ideas past me. Last year, she was the conference All-American. So she's still kind of on her track. Now she wants to go back to potentially playing on the LPGA Tour. So we just have to match what she's kind of doing with that. And I'm just there really now to guide. I still speak to her dad all the time. And that's really where I went back to and started to learn a lot more about junior development and the interaction with the people around junior teams. So as I progressed with the junior stuff, I ended up moving to the US to work and be the director of instruction at a junior academy in South Carolina, which it was a really great experience. I enjoyed living over there, met some fantastic people. But when we got over there, you know, I was kind of the director, and all of a sudden there was more voices within the team around the player. So we had, as we started to go older, as the athlete kind of increased age, she had a coach. Family was still very communicative. There was trainers, physical trainers involved. At that time, there wasn't a national coach or whatnot involved with her, but she had already early committed to play for a college team. So there was that level of communication there. So as that starts to increase, the player has to learn with the support to actually understand and take on what they want to take on and be able to throw out kind of what they don't need. So managing all that interference. With her, it was very, very different. So when my role was different as well, and just prior to going over there, I'd started reading more papers on things like Dave Collins had written on the Rocky Road to the Top and Super Champs, Champs and Almost, and things like this, and the PCDEs kind of came up. And when I had spoken, I did my due diligence of what college coaches actually looked for, because all these young golfers at this academy, they wanted to move on and play collegiate golf. So I asked the collegiate coaches, okay, what are you looking for? What type of things from players? What are your experiences of players that have come to your schools from junior academies? And it was very, very prominent that there was a tendency of them to not really have the work ethic, be a little bit kind of, if they didn't have their A game, they kind of give up a little bit, and all these kind of things. So I made it kind of a real mission of mine. This kind of went through the whole team that I had around me, to make the actual development of these young golfers much more about the PCDEs, psychological characteristics of developing excellence. Because whether they went to college to play golf or professional golf is very, very slim, but things like that will carry them through in life as well. We got there, and this girl was one of the best players in the academy, and we'd watched them play for a 2-round tournament, and I really, really noticed that her attitude and her application was like way off. She'd early committed to a school. She almost took that a little bit for granted. I then delved deep into it, and she was also failing her TOEFL to get into college. So from that, we had an Academy Cup. And the Academy Cup was, we selected players to go and play against other academies. Now, I had already cleared it with her coach, with the CEO of the company and whatnot, but I wasn't going to pick her, even though she was one of the best players in the academy, because I saw that I was going to use it as a vehicle to help her get back on the track. Because I laid it out to her and said, if you continue to do what you're going to do, you're failing TOEFL, not applying yourself, you're going to lose your scholarship. To start with, she didn't believe me. She was upset that she wasn't picked. But she did fail TOEFL. She did end up losing her scholarship. And in the end, she kind of came round, and we had pretty much a year and a half to really help her get through this. She wasn't happy with me not selecting her, but now she ended up playing at Kansas, and last year she won her first college event. And these were some of the messages after she won that she kind of sent me. She hated me at the time, But now when she reflects back on it, she felt that nobody had ever done that and held her accountable for these things. And that's including with the coaching team as well that we were in. So it was messy at the time, but it had a kind of a really, really nice outcome. And, you know, my personality is, I don't really like those levels of conflict, but I feel like I'm there to do a job. And that's really what I felt was the right decision to do at that particular moment in time. We then supported her through that transition. So she was really devastated. She, you know, crashed a little bit. We asked her to reflect. Dad was not happy at all. But the thing was, everybody around the team supported her to get through it. So we helped her kind of gravitate towards that scholarship that she wanted and finding something else. And she just improved. Not, you know, golf improved, but more than anything, her attitude just improved tremendously over really the last year before graduation. So that's a kind of a different kind of coaching story, and start to see that it's very, very different and can be quite messy at times. As we move forward, this was also the time that I finished writing the book. This is very much about for parents. I wrote it as a narrative, a story. I didn't really want to write anything as like a how-to book. I wanted the parents to read it, to potentially make up their own mind about things. And it's accumulation of men. So many people have asked me, who are these characters? Who are these? And they're made up of people that I've kind of come across over the years. It's not one particular individual, but the parents that have read it it's been relatively well received. And yeah, on to the next one potentially. But it took a long time to kind of get through. On to the next element, and this is kind of more the space where I work now with professional players. And again, you know, these are things that young golfers really need to learn and understand. That again, when they start to get up to the higher level, there's more and more people around. You know, they have managers, you have a caddy to deal with, the family is still around. You might have multiple coaches in different aspects. So it's really been having the ability in these players to manage all the voices within the team. I've spoken to Ed a little bit about this, and I also feel that the bigger the teams kind of get at professional levels, there's almost the need for a performance director to actually sit alongside the player and be able to kind of manage all the voices and whatnot, as you know, around the team. So as an example, this is a mini tour player. Well, when I met him, he was on the Challenge Tour in 2018. He lost his Challenge Tour card. During that time, I was out a little bit on the Challenge Tour with doing different roles. So we kind of met. I'd watched him play a little bit, and he, you know, he was a good player. Played in college, played Palmer Cup, and but he just got up there, and it just didn't work for him. And so over the year, we started working the back end of 2018. This was just one part of the analysis that I had done on him for that year for the Challenge Tour. And the numbers are, so he averaged 3.34 birdies in 2018, 2.97 bogeys, and 0.31 others per round. And the research that I'd looked into, and now it's come about with a stat system called GameForge, we kind of know that it's more around the Challenge Tour 4 to 4.5 and then 2. So during that time, we looked at this. I'd spoken to him, I'd watched him play. We'd had multiple conversations, and really we just built a framework, which he'd never had, around, well, how are we going to take blue off the scorecard? That was our theme kind of going forward. And that was, you know, the things that we did with him were very much in the practice space. It was way more practice on the golf course for him, because, you know, when we looked at him, he had the certain skills that he needed, but he just wasn't accessing those skills enough at the, you know, at the right time and playing tournament golf. So we narrowed some boundaries down, gave some principles to do with strategy, looked at all the areas that are going to enable us to take blue off the scorecard, so reduce the bogeys. He absolutely dived into it, loved everything, really enjoyed the whole practice side of things, because he was very, very, very heavily reliant on, even when he was playing, always tinkering around with his technique, always. So even in the middle of the tournament, you know, excessive amounts of focus on his, you know, on his technique, excessive amounts of over-exaggerated movements, the whole thing. And when we started to kind of look at it more task-related in conjunction with taking blue off the scorecard, he started to get a little bit more task-focused, a little bit more shot-focused versus technique-focused when he was in the heat of battle. And that just kind of worked for him. And it wasn't something that we necessarily said, okay, this is what we want you to do. This is just what came out of it. He then started the year on the Alps Tour again, won on the Alps Tour, and he was playing the Challenge Tour on invites. And we looked at the previous year, and if you earn the same money as top 70, which keeps your card in Challenge Tour, you can potentially play more events playing on invites, so you don't get limited. He did this within 4 events, so he earned enough money. He carried on, won his first Challenge Tour event, and then ended up getting his European Tour card at the school. Unfortunately, this is the year we had his European Tour card with Corona, so we're not really sure what's going to happen as yet. But great guy, pleasure to work with, and we're continuing to move him forward with that. So it's very much, you know, changing a little bit of his focus on what he was doing within the practice space. European Tour to top 50 in the world. This for me was kind of being in the right place at the right time. I moved back from the US to Austria. My wife is from here. I actually first met Bernd Wiesberger when he was 14 years of age, and I was actually working for one of the David Ledbetter academies in Austria. And we'd seen each other at multiple tour stops when I was working on tour. And when I came back, we just hooked up because we understand the same things. And he was getting really quite bored with his practice. He was just standing there again, just standard shelling of golf balls and whatnot. He'd been on tour a long time, and it just wasn't challenging him anymore. So he was playing poorly, wasn't really engaged. He asked me to get involved, and the same week he asked me to get involved, when I was actually watching him, what he was doing in practice, he got injured, and he was out of the game for 7 months. So it was kind of like, yeah, I'm in the right place at the right time. And then when he started to come back from this injury, because of the kind of the failings that I'd had earlier on with tour golf, I felt like I was ready to help him. And I felt I was ready to look at what he did and kind of help him, you know, move forward. And it was almost like he couldn't practice the same way. He couldn't stand there just beating ball after ball after ball, because his wrist potentially might not have stood up to it. So over that period, we had, you know, in the 7-month period, we had talked, we had had coffees, we had hung out. There was loads of elements of like doubt of whether he was, you know, how he's going to come back from this, how it was going to feel, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, he came out of it, you know, really, really slow to start with, but that was kind of planned. He didn't play so great in the first tournament, but again, he'd go away and play, he'd come back, we'd talk, figure out what was going on, ask him to reflect a little bit, question him. Okay, how were you? He'd been in the top 50 in the world before. What was it like to be there, etc., etc., etc. And really what happened was doing was we reduced his practice time and made it more intense. And we kind of came up with a kind of a slogan for ourselves that never waste a shot. So it wasn't so much of like, there was always something on every ball. It was always a target. We'd spend more time out on the golf course. And really what had happened was, for him, it was a new way of training. It was a new way of practicing. And it took a little bit of a time for him to really understand like what was, what this was about. But once it really kicked in, it really, really kicked in. He won 3 times last year, almost won the Order of Merit. A fantastic year. And he still has, he has his technical coach that does things with his, maintains some of his tendencies. He's 35 this year, to try and change a motor program at this time in his career. I just don't feel he has the time to even want to do that. But there's just managing little idiosyncrasies that he has and potentially will always have in his game. So he's very, very good at kind of coming up with certain cues for himself for movements within that technical space. So there's external cues. Also during that time, I got a lot of time speaking to Mark Brody to help me understand statistics a little bit more and how to view them and how to communicate them a little bit more. He had certain tendencies with what he was doing, and that all kind of incorporated into, well, what's the behaviors of tournament golf? So how can we recreate those? And it's very much a to and fro, We started doing some stuff to start with, which was, he goes, I don't really like this. Okay, why don't you like it? Oh, it doesn't feel like it's really about golf and whatnot. And as soon as you start getting into the fact that they're so highly tuned to scoring, and you make a lot of the tasks about scoring for him on the golf course, all of a sudden you start to get the level of interest and intensity sort of increase. And that's kind of where we are right now. Set some new goals for this year, but we're back practicing in Austria and just kind of set some dates potentially for the WGC in Memphis. Just seeing whether he's actually gonna, what the travel restrictions are gonna be at that particular time. So really the final thoughts on this was actually this beginning of this week. We were doing a task on the golf course, and I just want to kind of leave you with this. There's nobody around, just me and him. The golf course is empty, and he makes this putt, and there's like a fist pump because of the task that we're doing. It's matching the behaviors of what a tournament round, and that's on him as well. He can raise the level of his intensity in his practice to make it very much like the behaviors of what a tournament golfer would do. He knows what that is. We really work hard on trying to do that more often when we're on the golf course. And our goal with this is just to create an accumulation of good days. And if we can keep that over weeks and weeks and weeks, I feel he hasn't even reached his potential just yet. And hopefully he can kick on and hopefully play Ryder Cup at some point, and all these other things. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I welcome all your questions that may be coming in.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Stu. And anybody on the webinar, if you want to post questions, please post them in the chat and we'll come to you. And on YouTube, please post those on the comments section. Stu, thanks for that. Really, some great stories there about different experiences you've had. So I know, Ed, if we go over to you to open up the questions, and then I think there's some questions starting to come through. We'll head back over to Phil.
Yeah, Stu, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Some lovely insights there. I just have a question around how you spoke about there the use of stats packages and engaging with someone like Mark Brody to get a better understanding of what those guys, the big data sets that these guys use to inform, what the players are doing, but also what the greater player population are doing. I'd be very interested to know, how do you use stats to inform your practice design, and what to make it special or specific or bespoke to the players that you work with? Because as we all know, stats can be very globalized and very general. I'd be interested to know just how you make it more specific then to the individual in front of you.
Yeah, so I was very lucky to kind of meet Mark, and when I was before I'd actually spoken to him, I was looking at copious amounts of stats, almost like looking at them kind of up round after round after round. And after speaking to him, he actually Brody said to me, he goes, don't look at it that way. Try and look at it over a bigger sample size, and then see if there's any kind of anomalies that you see from what you kind of expect from this particular player. And the thing is, I always look at strengths first. I never look at the weaknesses. So I know where the players are at their strengths and what generally they do play in their best. And if I see those drop off, then I start asking questions about that first, and then put that into a training plan. And once we get those up to a certain level of, and this is interaction from the player as well, sometimes the player will come back and say, okay, I feel like I have the shots that I need to hit right now with let's say my iron play or whatever it might be, and then move on to some of the areas that we feel that they're losing more shots against the field. So for example, I'll give you an example with Byrne. Like last year, he actually won the Italian Open because of his putting. I think he was massive on strokes gained against the field for that. That never happened before. And the primary thing with that was, the whole year was he used to get almost too ingrained or too in tune with how the putter is moving rather than holding putts. So it was then very much about helping him direct his, I guess you'd call it like focus of attention towards what he was doing, where his gaze control was over and around the ball. Was it too short? Was it long enough? Whatever it might have been, that's how we used it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Does that make sense, Ed?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So basically it's looking at it over a sample size rather than just a micro element, seeing if there's any things that crop up, and then building the strengths back into the practice, which were key, and then looking at the weaknesses actually second.
Just on that before, because I can see questions coming in. Just wait. How do you cope with that when a player's maybe what they perceive to be the way their game is, and then you actually look at it and you think maybe you're not as good as you think you are, or vice versa? How do you deal with that little?
I generally, I'll tell them pretty straight. I trust the numbers more than I trust somebody's, kind of their feeling about something.
Yeah.
And then if you say, well, no, that's not right, then I'll go to the caddy because he's the one that fills a lot of the stuff in. So it's like that's right. But it's very much, I think Daniel Kahneman talked about it a lot, didn't he? About trusting the data more than actually trusting your instinct too much about things. And I tend to go, down that road a little bit. But it's always interesting to hear what the player thinks about these things.
Of course, great. Thanks. Thank you.
Lovely stuff. Thanks very much. So we're going to jump into some of the questions that are coming through. And the next question is coming from Alex Sari. So Alex, if you're there, I can unmute you. And if you'd like to ask the question yourself, and then if there's any follow-up or any context you need to add, you're very welcome to do that. Over to you, Alex.
Hi, Stu. Hi, buddy. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? Long time.
Great. Yeah, I know. Long time no speak. Yeah. Great talk. Really enjoyed that. Just a quick question, which I think the whole group might benefit from. What techniques do you use in a training environment to increase the intensity and the pressure?
With better players, Alex, it's generally always about you've got to find what really rattles them to start with, and that, for me, with the better players, is primarily always score related. So you can kind of manipulate that. You can manipulate boundaries of the golf course to influence score and so on and so forth. But the more you kind of meet and get to know the players about the human element, and you start to know what their behaviors are and their values, how they see the world. Some people are just wired that it doesn't matter who they are. They might just not like losing money. With some younger golfers, just to have some fun, you have to sing a song on somebody's Instagram page, but that's just like fun stuff. But with the better players, for me anyway, the more I tune it into scoring and manipulate that's what really gets them gets them kind of wired up, basically, because they're just so wired into that anyway. I mean, that's that's primarily.
So you always use a consequence and a reward,
and it's always geared around a score. Like with the better player, anyway, it's always geared around a score, because we can't get away from it. It's there. It's not going away. You have to sign for a score at the end of the tournament, and because they're so in tune with that, that's one of the big things that potentially rattles them more than anything.
Sure.
So I guess that's the. But then you can start to say, okay, I've used dice. I can just choose. Okay, this hole, we're going back 100 meters off the tee shot. We're taking right side out. This is double OB. But it's always a score base. It's always a task based on the score, to be honest.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, man. Hope you're well.
All right. Yeah, you too. Cheers.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Stu. So I'm going to take the opportunity to jump in and ask a question myself at this point. Again, the chat's there and Alan's checking the YouTube as well, so keep your questions coming in. Stuart, I really enjoyed the perspective you gave about what different aspects of the journey look like. I'm curious as to whether junior athletes have a good picture of what the pathway ahead of them looks like. Have they got a realistic picture of what it's like and what the investment is required from them in order to make it at advanced levels of the game? So that's kind of part one. What do junior athletes have a good picture of what's that like? And the second picture, given how hard that journey is, how realistic a picture do you want them to have?
That's a great question. I would say no to start. I don't think they do have a real understanding, especially when they're younger and whatnot. The ones who I have seen that have a slightly understanding, and this is not everybody, but the ones who have some form of access to professionals. So whether there was one at their club or somebody in the area that they kind of knew of, and so then all of a sudden they're seeing what happens and what it takes and so on and so forth. From a standpoint of would I want them to understand? Potentially not at the start, but I feel as they start to get older and a little bit more cognitive understanding of what the world is, then a little bit more realistic behaviors in, okay, if you want to get to this level, this is the level that it takes, and this is kind of what it takes. But that potentially will come on later in their life, basically. And I also feel that I like to see that potentially happen after they've gone through maturation a little bit, because around that time there could be levels of skill regression, and it could generate a huge amount of frustration around that time. So it's if they still want to do it after that, then we can kind of ramp it up and make it a little bit more a little bit more specific in their goals and what they're actually trying to do on a day-to-day basis. I hope that answers your question anyway.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're right. Again, if you can see somebody who's just at that next level ahead, that can be so powerful in terms of
absolutely
facilitating that.
Because they don't want to be me, right? They they want to be somebody that's like playing the game and whatnot. And I think that's like a level of mentorship, in that as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we're going to jump over to Alan now. He's got a question that's come in on YouTube, so I'll pass over to Alan.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a quick question from Bert Bates on YouTube, and it's a little bit further along the time frame than you've talked about so far, Stuart. And he's looking to get some information on how you would approach maybe coaching senior athletes in terms of reducing their handicaps, because obviously we've talked from tots or from juniors to pros, and then maybe going a little bit further than that.
I have absolutely no idea. I just, the only things I would say from maybe I've spoken to a few like senior athletes or senior golfers, potentially more like the mobility stuff, the physical elements potentially. But again, it would be, I would still say it's all relative to their time that they have to put into the, into the game, what they want to do. There's so many facets that I guess do some of the practice as well on the golf course. It's not necessarily, that's where you want to do your scoring and improve. So potentially learn to do more on course than actually just on a practice facility. But that's just me hypothesizing right now. I actually don't coach any senior golfers. Or I would, if somebody did come my way and I don't know enough, I would potentially find somebody for that individual to go and work with. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question any better than that, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's good. I do agree. Staying on the golf course is obviously a key element of that there, and quite often you're probably dealing with people who've got a little bit more time to spend on the golf course, and obviously their action capabilities are changing quite significantly as they get that little bit older. But yeah, no, it's a good insight. Just a quick one for myself. You touched on reflective practice a little bit earlier. Just wondering, in terms of for the group, can you expand a little bit on how you maybe encourage reflective practice, or do you have a structure that you have in place for that kind of thing?
I would say, first of all, it's probably one of the most, I've spoken to Ed a lot about this, and it's probably one of the most uncoached skills that I feel elite golfers or elite sports people kind of require. And there are some that do it very well and almost like a little bit more automated, but there are also some that just don't want to go down that road at all. And I feel, from my standpoint as a coach, if it starts early, where you start to ask players questions about what they've done, about their behaviors and stuff like that, as they start to get older, they then start to already have that in place. But it's also, I'm still a massive one for journaling, and writing things down, as and when they've happened, or just after the rounds and stuff like that. And that's the stuff that I really, really encourage. We've just done something now with like reflective practice with some players looking at their team structures, and just reflecting on, well, how the teams that they have around them, how can they quantify that those people are actually helping them shoot lower scores? Because so it's almost like, well, just look, understanding, what's happening in my team, who's doing what. So I guess that's one part of reflective practice as well.
Very good, very nice, absolutely. That's brilliant. I'm going to bring you back across to Phil now. I think Phil's got another few questions to come in from there.
Yeah, so we've got a really nice question from Adele Randalls, actually. So Adele, if you're there, I'm just going to unmute you now. Yeah, so if you'd like to pose your question.
Yeah, thanks Stu. I've enjoyed your talk so far. And Stu, I'm just curious on your views on making golf environments more natural playgrounds for young people, so that more people play and more people can then progress positively through the game.
Sorry, say that again. Making the golf courses more,
I suppose, like all of our other sports that we play here, team sports, others, there's a natural kind of gradient in terms of starting, progressing in the sport. I don't think that golf necessarily follows that. It's difficult for young people to get into the game, to stay in the game. I'm just wondering about your views and how you make it more natural for young people to be involved and progressing naturally through the game.
I mean, it's really, again, a really great question. I think some of it starts, from golf clubs kind of releasing the dress code elements and things like that to start with. And actually, I was very, very lucky. I grew up in a golf course where we had a massive junior section. The golf club were very supportive of the junior section. We had, junior managers there who were very, very encouraging and whatnot. And it's just figuring out what's the best way of doing that, and also just allowing kids to just come in and just play, do whatever they want to do, really, as long as they're respectful to the people that are around them. But I don't think, looking at it now, when I was dressed, I look at some old pictures, like dressed in certain golf clothing, and I just don't think kids want to do that. They want to go in their trainers and tracksuit bottoms and whatnot. So I think that would be that's the biggest start, I think, for a lot of golf clubs, because then you can just kind of go up there as and when. You don't have to plan. If I was with my kids, plan, well, what are they going to wear to go there? Are they going to have to change into their blazer and tie to go into the clubhouse after? Try and find me somebody who wants to do that as a young, and I think it's quite off-putting, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I think it's really about just finding looking at golf clubs that are very, very committed to the environment of what juniors require. We even had our own junior room at the club where I was, and we all just used to hang out in there, and it was just great fun, and they were really, really supportive of that. So there's some golf clubs going to be like that and some that are not, and it's just finding out which one it is, because if they have a good experience to start with, there's a higher probability they're going to stay in the game.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, thanks, Adele. So we're going to switch over. Ed Colin has got a question for us now. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Phil. Stuart, I know from hearing you previously and the like, there are very few. There are some, but there are very few coaches out there who have come from the very technical background of the game. The very almost traditional, the more expected background of the game, and moved into the place that you're in, where you are able to have conversations both technically but also around that practice environment and working through constraints and the like. Why, I suppose, a question I have from your experience in there, why does golf appear to have almost a reflex action to go straight after the technical when things go wrong, and when there's so many other aspects that can, and it's not that the technical side of the game isn't important, because of course it is. Any sport that has a skill in it, there's going to be technical elements, but golf seems to go straight after the technical first and foremost, and very often then gets caught in a search cycle around the technique rather than the other elements of the game.
I think you said it there. I think it's very much a tradition and a cultural thing of where we've been in, to be quite honest, and somewhat continue to be there. I also think that the mechanics and the technique versus from the learning perspective and things like that, it's much easier to see some sort of change and whatnot within a technique, versus something that's kind of going on, inside of the brain and whatnot. So it's a lot along those lines as well. For me, like from my thing was, I got quite disillusioned with it, Ed, to be honest, because I was very much looking at the technical aspect as a kind of a what to do, and it wasn't producing what I felt that it should, from just looking at it from a technical point of view. So yes, it's there, what to do, but I think we, as golf coaches, we need to really understand why. So why are you doing it? So if you're doing some technical intervention, what's the reason behind doing that? Is it to guard against injury? Is it to provide strike? Is it speed? Whatever it might be. How are you going to do it? So how does that implement into some form of practice space? And then there's also the component of when. So it's like, well, when do you want to do this type of practice versus that type of practice on some level of continuum? But then also obviously the one big thing that underpins everything is the human element, is the person that's in front of you, which if you kind of don't know what that is, somewhat all those other things are completely irrelevant. So it's like, for me, I got disillusioned by just working in the technical space. And I always started to think there has to be more than this. And for me, you know, we're in a fantastic place from the technical standpoint. You know, we have leading biomechanists, you know, doing some fantastic work. You know, Sasha McKenzie and Dr. Kwan and Mark Bull and whatnot with all the with all the sensors and whatnot. But there's also great people like that, like yourself, Dr. Robert Bjork, Anders Ericsson, you know, Carl Newell that we've looked at. There's all these people in this learning space as well. Yeah. And so it's like, it's just balancing up this whole thing of saying, we have it there, so why don't we have it in the learning space as well?
Well, I think what's interesting about that for me is, like, when you started working with let's say Biesberger, you said initially he was a bit reluctant because he was so used to the almost a singular method of improvement, which had provided him with certain success, but nothing like that. You know, he's nothing like what he now expects of himself, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd be interested to know, what are the things that you did in one sense to almost break that cycle in his own head that no, this is the way it is, and you're asking me to do it another way. What are those kind of conversations like?
Well, I think to start with it was him coming to me, right? It was like you know, we'd had conversations about practice and he kind of like started asking my views, you know, on it. And like I said, I felt like I was in the right place. I felt I was ready for it there. And I think if it would have been maybe 5 years earlier, I potentially wouldn't have done enough reading or understand or speak to the likes of, you know, yourself and other guys like in that space, where I felt like, okay, I feel like I'm ready for this now. I have enough things backed up to say, okay, we can move in this way. And I just gave him the experience to start with, Ed. So I set a few things up and just let him kind of go with it. And then we had a discussion about it. And he basically turned around to me after a few sessions. He says, I feel I'm mentally tired than I am physically tired. And I said, is that a good thing? And he was like, and he goes, yeah, I feel that's a good thing. Because now he goes, also, again, he's older. He's getting into a situation where he's been out there a long time, got to keep motivation high. You know, there's other things outside of golf that he needs to do as well. You know, sponsors commitments, spending time with family and whatnot. And the sustainability of what he was doing potentially wasn't there. So, like I said, it was the right time for potentially both of us, really, around that.
That idea about being more cognitively fatigued goes back to that point that you made earlier about just being better quality practice.
Yeah.
You know,
and every shot has a target. It has something we're trying to hit towards. He has to call the shape, you know, whatever it might be. And this feedback, you know, if we're using a TrackMan or GC2, whatever, you know, we use TrackMan, but other people use, you know, many different devices. But it's never just the case of saying, oh, I need to check my yardages. It's not about that. It's a case of hit to a number that thing gives you and get some feedback from that, rather than the other way around of just hitting and then getting a number.
And which again brings you to my next question about, as you were saying, he's now 35 years of age, and he does have a guy who works with him technically.
Absolutely.
But it's not changing anything because of the difficulty of changing motor pattern at this age. It's actually just about actually just maintaining certain things and watching out for little things that might creep in. Is that what you were saying?
And the other things with that as well is with the technical stuff, where, you know, at times we, you know, when I'm around, we get together, like the technical coach, me and him, and the technical coach will talk about, you know, left knee moving or whatever it might be. And then I'm there to say, and we start now getting into the thing of like, well, no, let's try and cue this movement, or let's come up with some kind of analogy that links it all together, rather than focusing on that specific part of the anatomy.
Yeah.
And he starts doing that himself now, which is even more powerful, to be honest. Like, we don't even need to ask him. It's more like, he was talking something about posture the other day. He goes, I feel like I've got a coat hanger on the back of my shirt that's kind of keeping me up, you know, just little things like that. And that's just him coming up with that himself.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like, as you were saying, that performance director, that feel, and I'm not saying that that's you specifically, but it just means that there needs to be that connectivity around the pro player. There needs, and again, with all the players at every level, but there needs to be that connectivity, but also the continuity of the discussion, that he's not hearing one thing from someone else, that he's hearing something very different, but that they're actually connected to the story, the thread of discussion. Let's say.
And I look at all the data and whatnot that we get and whatnot, and I put that together, and I look at kind of trends that he has and so on and so forth. So then I'm like, always, if you're working on something with technique or shot or whatnot, like, why are we doing it? Like, we has to have some kind of context that's going to lower scores. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time.
One last thing from me, because I'm conscious of just hogging it too much, is I know you're very good friends with Dave Allred, and I know he's had a huge impact on the golf space. What are the key things from all your discussions with Dave? And I know he's even done workshops for you with your pro team in Switzerland. What are the key things that you take away from that time with Dave, and what you feel can impact other coaches as well?
I feel that the language he uses is really good in the coaching sessions that he does. Yes, it's positive with affirmations, but it's also again, he's not frightened, especially when I've talked to him about like kicking in rugby per se, because that's what he really knows, right? Yeah. In golf, I would say it's really the intensity of training, like making one ball matter the most. And I would say that those are the big things. So his general level of upbeatness, the communication that he puts into it, doesn't let him off the hook at all. They're there to do a job, they're there to perform and whatnot, and that's what we're there. That's what we're there to do. We're there to work. And just again, the process of making the practice more connected to the game, and I think that's the big thing where I got disillusioned in the past. I was working on technique, but it was so disconnected from what the game was. And I think that's where my disillusionment kind of came from, and my frustration came from.
Yeah, it's an interesting one about Dave, because anybody who's ever watched him on the practice range or in the course, it's only ever a few balls within
Absolutely.
it never goes beyond that, let's say, and even how they as a team work around Molinari with Dennis Pugh and Phil Kenyon, because I know we've spoken about them in the past. It's all intense, very intense.
Yeah, and I think I remember speaking to, like, Dave was the first one that said about, and it was very much just on him with regards to like the 5 kicks or the 5 balls or whatever. And I was speaking to Tim Lee once, who's one of the great motor control researchers and whatnot, and just randomly it popped up. He says, yes, it's linked to like concentration. So it's like 4 to 6 shots with let's say, and he was talking about golf. Whereas if you go past that, the concentration drops off so much that you actually lose the cognitive load. So you lose the engagement, and the brain ultimately gets bored, and you're just doing a physical act at that point, rather than actually doing anything purposeful.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we'll go over. We've got probably time for 2 more questions. We've got one from YouTube. So, Alan.
Yeah, thanks for that. We've got a question from Brian O'Reilly on YouTube, who's asked about your thoughts on imagery or visualization at the range, Stuart, and if you would always prefer to go to the course, or would you rather be at the range at particular times?
Would I rather be at the range at particular times and to do with visualization? I think some people are good at visualizing, some people are not. I think if you can do it, I think it's a huge, it adds huge value, especially if you're at the range and you're on a big field to create whatever, like be able to visualize the shot and so on and so forth. I think that's a big attribute to kind of have. I always think with the golf course though, it's it's kind of there in front of you, right? I mean, you kind of see the things that you kind of need to do. I think sometimes on the range, you just, you have to really work hard to kind of get that same level of context and representativeness of what it is you're doing. But, you know, for people who kind of only get to the range, I like people to even have like an old yardage book in their bag, because then they can just get that out, have a look, you know, visualize something or a hole that they've played or struggled with playing, and go through it that way.
And so it's a case of, if you are at the range and you don't have the option to be in the course, then try and create that context around it. But inevitably, the course is going to be the best indicator.
But you know, but even like sometimes, you know, we'll be on the range and, you know, I'll say, oh, this is the same. This hit me the shot like you hit into 13 in Dubai, right? Or hit me the shot, the first tee shot at the Open in Northern Ireland. You know, it's like that to me is also kind of tuning them into what it is that they're doing, into the task, and so on and so forth. And that also can help visualization. But you also have visualization in other elements as well. I mean, visualization in kinesthetic motor imagery as well. You know, that's a level of visualization. Same as meditation. You know, there's visualization components to that. So it's multifaceted. But I have seen some that are great and some that are not. You know, that do it and some that don't.
So yeah, we just got time for one more question. So I'd just like to ask you, so Keith Davids, he chatted about this general specific continuum. You might have seen the talk we had 2 weeks ago. So I'm interested in that from a golf perspective. So what does that look like in a golf world, the general to specific practice continuum? How is that influenced by, shall we say, role models or golf stars and what they do? And in essence, around that practice, you know, are there people that have come into golf from other sports? Are there donor sports that are potentially better for golfers, and they're more kind of have a better feel as a result of that?
I think from the you talk about the skill there, Ollie, with regards to, or you know, of like, or the environment that
probably more chatting about the actual practice and what they do in terms of, you know, does everybody go out and do specific practice on the course that's score based, or do they more do they?
No, it's a mix. To be like, so some will do, like, you know, we'll go onto the practice facility or the practice range and whatnot, and you know, each player has like a shot library that they kind of, you know, almost like to hit. So they want to strike the ball well with a particular flight that they put on the golf ball. But the key then for me is, you know, if I'm there with them, or I try and encourage them, if they go there and they have these shots that they are like their core shots that they want to hit, don't stay there and like massage the kind of the ego. Move straight away to something more challenging or more, you know, onto the golf course. But if they don't have those shots, potentially stay in that element or in that kind of thing and work at it, you know, a little bit. And I think this is where in golf per se, we, you know, the driving ranges came about. I never had a driving range when I grew up. So I used to spend more time on the golf course. The more driving ranges that, you know, they are around, they're not going away. So people do go and kind of use them. The thing is that people tend to stay or do too much on them, in my view. So they stand there getting something, you know, getting a shot going or something that they're working on, but then they never go on the golf course, which is more specific, and try and test it out in that environment.
Yeah.
And a lot of it sometimes, okay, if I go there, it's like, I don't want to go there too soon because I might fail. But if you don't go there and you don't fail, how do you know that it's going to transfer? That, you know, that's the big thing for me.
Yeah.
So I'm all for having them stay at one side, one end of the continuum, you know, and having their core shots that they're looking to train. For me, it's always primarily coupled with a yardage that they're trying to hit at, or a fairway on the range that they're trying to hit at. and then just move. As soon as they feel, okay, I'm good here, I'm just going to move now onto the golf course, and then move back if they need be. But it's like, that's that kind of messiness, within the skill development. It's not like I go from point A to point B to point C and everything's like hunky-dory. It's like I go to A, then I'll go to B, and then sometimes back to A, and then I'll jump forward to C, and then I'll come back to A again. It's a lot of to and fro-in.
And much of that stuff is influenced by what others do, and particularly successful others. Like how disciplined are people to stick to their plan versus influenced by what other people are doing and maybe being successful with that.
I think we're in golf, we're very culturally led, right? So we see a lot of things happening on driving ranges and whatnot, but we don't actually know what's happening on driving ranges unless you're actually with that person and you're talking to that person. So what might look like a massing of practice, it may not be. It may be something that they're hitting one club, the person that's watching doesn't see them change club, move to a different target or whatnot. They just see a pile of balls, right? And that's what we perceive happens a lot of the time in golf. And there is sometimes you do have to do an element of it, but really where I come from, it's about people generally have more fun if they shoot lower scores. And at the end that I'm working at, if I don't help players shoot lower scores, I'm going to get fired.
Yeah.
And so but that to me is with understanding these things, that's where I feel that, or I look back at it, and when I started reading academic papers and books and not golf swing books, just different things. Yeah. This is where it's helped me. And speaking to like people like Ed and Orid and whatnot, understanding it from other sports and how we can primarily move golf forward, really, in that respect.
Great. Well, Stu, I think we've run over a little bit there, so it's probably time that we kind of wrap it up now. I just want to thank you so much for your time and for chatting with us this evening. Really great to have you on. Also, thanks for everybody for joining in as well and putting in some really interesting questions in there. So thanks for that. You can keep up to date with any future webinar announcements that we have at MSA Ireland on our Twitter page. So that's at MSA Ireland. And we've got some great speakers lined up. So keep an eye out on Twitter for that. Also, any of the webinars that we have are hosted on our YouTube page, which is MSA Ireland. So check that out. And any comments, feedback, please feel free, send those through on Twitter and we'll have a look at those. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great weekend and we'll see you hopefully again maybe next week. Bye.